Okay, let's unpack this. Here's something that might surprise you. Bobal. It's a red grape,
Yeah.
super widely planted across Spain.
Yeah, huge plantings.
But for years, it kind of flew under the international radar, didn't it? Often overshadowed by, the big names like Tempranillo or Garnacha.
That's right. And what's really fascinating, I think, is that this grape, it's historically significant in eastern Spain, has this incredibly rich heritage that, well, wine lovers are really starting to notice now.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about for you, the learner. You want to get the knowledge quickly but properly without feeling overwhelmed.
Hmm.
So our mission today is to really pull out the essence of what makes Bobal so interesting. We're drawing from our source, which is just called Bobal.
Pretty comprehensive source, too. Covers the whole story.
It really does. Origins, history, the land, the terroir, what the vine actually looks like, winemaking, taste, food.
Food pairings, the producers, the DOs,
Yeah.
everything.
And if we step back for a second, Bobal isn't just, another grape. It seems deeply woven into the history and the culture of its home turf, especially around Valencia.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a cornerstone of their winemaking for, well, centuries. Deep roots there.
So let's start right at the beginning then. Where did Bobal actually come from, and how did it get so dominant in those regions?
Well, the general understanding, the consensus, is that it's native autochthonous to eastern Spain.
Right.
The Utiel-Requena and Manchuela areas are really seen as its historical heartland. That's where it's most deeply rooted.
Boba. It's a curious name. Any clues about where that came from?
There are a couple of ideas floating around. One popular theory is that the name might relate to the shape of the grape bunch.
Oh.
Yeah, some say it can look a bit like a bull's head. Bovido in Spanish means bovine.
Okay.
Another idea, maybe simpler, is that it just refers to the grape being really hardy, kind of rustic and resilient.
That definitely fits the picture that's emerging. And you mentioned its history in the Valencian community goes way, way back.
Oh, absolutely. There's evidence suggesting Bobal's been cultivated there since the 15th century, at least.
Oh.
And yeah, while it did eventually spread a bit to other Spanish wine regions, it always remained most concentrated, most important right there in Utiel-Requena and Manchuela.
What was it about those specific spots that made it thrive for so long?
It really comes down to the terroir, the environment. Utiel-Requena and Manchuela, they have this continental climate, but with Mediterranean touches, meaning hot, really dry summers, pretty cold winters, and generally low rainfall. Bobal just proved incredibly resilient in those conditions. And it also did well in the soils there, which are often quite poor, stony.
So it became the real backbone, the workhorse of the local wine scene.
Exactly that. For centuries, Bobal was absolutely fundamental to the rural economy there, mainly through bulk wine production and also rosés.
Right. Quantity over perceived quality back then, maybe.
Pretty much. Its reliable yields and its sheer toughness made it a dependable crop for the growers.
And it even managed to survive the phylloxera disaster. That's huge.
That's right. After phylloxera wiped out vineyards across Europe in the late 1800s, Bobal was one of the key varieties replanted in Utiel-Requena and Manchuela.
Why was that?
Because it adapted really well to being grafted onto resistant American rootstocks, and it just thrived in the local conditions. So that replanting period really cemented its dominance there.
But as you hinted, it wasn't always thought of as a grape for, let's say, top-tier wines.
That's a really critical point, yeah. For a long, long time, its main role was providing juice for bulk wine, high volume.
Okay.
But then, more recently, say in the last few decades, things started to change. A new wave of producers, winemakers, and mycologists came along with a totally different mindset.
What was their goal?
Their goal was quality. They wanted to unlock Bobal's real potential to make higher quality wines. It's often called the rediscovery of Bobal.
A deliberate shift away from just churning out volume towards showcasing what the grape and the land could actually do.
Precisely. And a big part of that was recognizing the value hidden in the old Bobal vineyards. Some of these are over 50, even 100 years old.
And old vines mean?
Old vines naturally produce less fruit, but the grapes they do produce are much more concentrated, more complex. That leads to wines with, real depth and character.
And it sounds like they didn't just make better wine. They actively tried to change how people thought about Bobal.
Absolutely. There were and still are strategic efforts in communication, promotion, marketing, really trying to build a new image for Bobal by emphasizing its authenticity, its connection to the place, its resilience, which is a big selling point now, and, of course, the dramatically improved quality of the wines themselves. Highlighting the unique terroir expression was key.
And did the critics start to take notice? Did that help?
Yes, definitely. Increasingly, wine critics began tasting these new style Bobals, recognizing the quality jump and writing positively about them. That validation absolutely helped boost the grape's resurgence and gain it more international attention.
Okay, so terroir keeps coming up. It sounds absolutely central to the Bobal story. Let's really dig into that, where it grows and how that shapes the wine.
For sure. Terroir, it's that whole package: climate, soil, altitude, everything in the environment that affects the vine. And for Bobal, the main regions each leave their own distinct fingerprint on the wine.
Let's start with the big one, Utiel-Requena. You called it the heartland.
Right. Utiel-Requena sits on this high plateau, averaging about 700 meters above sea level. That altitude is really important.
How so?
It gives it that continental climate with Mediterranean influence, but crucially, it leads to a big difference in temperature between day and night. Warm, sunny days for ripening, but cool nights.
That diurnal fifth.
Exactly. Much more pronounced than in many warmer spots. And the soils are mostly clay and limestone. This swing in temperature lets bulb develop all those complex flavors and colors, but crucially, it hangs on to its acidity. That's gold, especially with warming trends.
So how does a typical Utiel-Requena Bobal taste then? What are the hallmarks?
You often get really intense color, a good solid structure balanced by that bright acidity we mentioned, and aromas leaning towards red and black fruits, maybe some spicy notes. The tannins can be quite present too.
Okay, and Manchuela, the other key zone.
Manchuela is just west of Utiel-Requena, also on a similar high plateau, similar climate, similar clay limestone soils predominating, so the wines share some characteristics.
But with differences.
Yeah, often Manchuela Bobals might show slightly softer tannins, maybe more upfront red fruit character, sometimes some nice herbal touches like thyme or rosemary.
Interesting. And then there's the broader Valencia Dio. Sounds like more variety there.
Yes, definitely more variability within the Valencia Dio. You've got areas closer to the coast with a stronger Mediterranean feel, and then inland spots that are more continental. So that naturally leads to a wider spectrum of Bobal styles, reflecting those different microclimates and soils.
And you mentioned some other spots too, like Aragon, Murcia, smaller scale.
Correct. You do find Bobal grown in these regions, but on a much smaller scale, usually in pockets where the climate and soil conditions mimic its main homelands.
So that climate, those long, hot, dry summers, that's basically what the grape needs to get ripe.
Absolutely essential. It needs that sustained warmth and sun to develop sugars and those important phenolic compounds, color, tannin, flavor precursors.
But the cool nights are just as important for the acidity.
Just as important. That diurnal range is key for keeping the wines fresh and balanced, stopping them from tasting, flabby or heavy. And the generally low humidity in summer also helps by reducing the pressure from fungal diseases.
And the altitude factor, especially in Utiel-Requena, really amps up that temperature difference.
Precisely. That higher elevation intensifies the day-night swing, which is great for acidity retention and also seems to encourage the development of really intense fruit and floral aromas in the grapes.
What about the soils? Clay limestone seems common. What does that bring to the party?
Well, clay limestone soils tend to drain well, which is good, but they also hold on to some moisture, which is vital in dry climates. They're usually not overly fertile, which can be good for wine quality. It encourages the vine to focus on fruit rather than just leaves. They can also contribute to the structure and sometimes a kind of mineral edge in the wines.
It's fascinating how all these pieces, climate, altitude, soil, fit together to give these regional personalities.
It really is. And remember, even within one region, you have microclimates. Things like the specific slope, how much sun a particular plot gets, if it's near water, wind patterns. All these little variations add further nuances to the final wine. It's complex stuff.
All right, great overview of the where. Now let's zoom right in on the vine itself. What are we actually looking at with Bobal, the ampelography as you call it?
All right, the botanical description. So the adult leaf of a Bobal vine is usually medium to large. It's got that classic pentagonal shape, typically with 5 lobes.
Ooh, the points?
Yeah, the main sections of the leaf. Sometimes the edges of these lobes overlap, and they usually come to a point.
Okay. Any other telltale signs on the leaf?
The little notch where the stem joins the leaf, the petiolar sinus that's usually V-shaped or maybe U-shaped, sometimes with little teeth-like edges, sometimes smooth. The top surface of the leaf, fairly smooth, maybe a tiny bit fuzzy. The underside is usually hairier, especially along the veins, and, the leaves change color through the season, like any deciduous plant.
Makes sense. And the bunch of grapes.
Medium to large bunches, usually conical, like an upside-down triangle.
Yep.
Often they have little shoulders, smaller clusters branching off near the top. The berries can be packed in there quite tightly, medium to high density, and the main stem of the bunch gets quite woody by harvest time.
And the berry itself, the important part.
Indeed. Medium-sized berries, mostly round, maybe slightly oval, and the skin is key. It's thick and pretty tough. When ripe, it's a really deep blue-black color.
Thick skin means?
Means lots of color compounds, anthocyanins, and lots of tannins and other phenolic compounds. That's where Bobal gets its intense color and structure from. Inside, the pulp is juicy, tastes fairly neutral to maybe slightly sweet before fermentation. That skin is really a defining feature.
Sounds like a robust package. How does it behave during the growing season, its cycle?
Okay, so bud burst, when the buds open up, is usually mid-spring. Not super early, not super late. Ripening, though, is generally considered medium to late.
Which is an advantage in sunny places, right?
Exactly. It gives it plenty of time on the vine in those warm, sunny regions to fully develop sugars and those all-important phenolics while, as we keep saying, holding on to its acidity surprisingly well.
Good acid retention even when it's hot. That's a recurring theme.
It's a major plus for Bobal. It's also naturally quite resistant to drought and heat, and it has some resistance to common fungal diseases, too. That's why it historically did so well where it did.
But it still needs sun and heat.
Oh yeah, it definitely needs ample sunshine and warmth to ripen fully. Interestingly, its own foliage, which can be quite dense, offers some natural protection against sunburn for the grapes.
So growers need to manage this vine carefully, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Vineyard management is key. Pruning, for instance, is crucial. You need to balance how much leafy growth the vine puts out versus how much fruit it sets. Bobal can adapt to different pruning styles, traditional or modern. You have the main winter prune, then often some green pruning during summer to manage the canopy and crop load.
And how the vines are physically supported. The training systems.
Bobal's pretty adaptable there, too. The traditional way in Spain is often as a freestanding bush vine, or en vaso. This offers good shade for the grapes in hot climates and can produce great quality fruit, but it makes using tractors and machines much harder.
And the alternative. More modern vineyards often use espalier systems, trading the vines along wires. This gives you much better control over the canopy, lets in more light and air if needed, makes mechanization easier, and can sometimes lead to higher yields, though that needs careful management.
What about diseases and pests? You said it's resistant but not immune.
Right. While it's generally tough, those tight bunches we mentioned can be a weak spot for rot, especially if it gets humid around harvest time. So good vineyard practices are vital, starting with clean plant material, managing the canopy for good airflow, keeping the vine balanced, ensuring good soil drainage. Things like mildew and botrytis bunch rot can still be issues growers need to watch for, along with certain insects. Integrated pest management is the usual approach.
And water, in those dry regions, is irrigation used? Well, its natural drought resistance means it often doesn't need a lot of extra water. But sometimes, providing a bit of controlled irrigation at critical moments like flowering or when the berries are developing can really help optimize ripening and stop the vine getting too stressed, which can shut it down. It's a balancing act. Choosing the absolute best site, the right terroir, is fundamental. And there's ongoing work looking at clonal selection, finding the best individual Bobal vines to propagate.
It really sounds like a vine that rewards careful handling, tailored to where it's growing.
Okay, let's follow those grapes into the winery. How does Bobal become wine?
Right, the winemaking. It typically starts with careful grape selection, often followed by de-stemming, removing the grapes from the bunches. Then, usually a gentle crush to break the skins, but ideally not the seeds, because seeds can release bitter tannins.
And then for reds, it's all about getting that color and structure out of the skins.
Exactly. Maceration, letting the juice soak with the skins, is absolutely key. How long you do this really depends on the style you're after.
So different for rosé versus red. Totally different. For rosés, it's a very short maceration, maybe just a few hours, just enough to get that lovely pink color and fresh red fruit notes, but minimal tannins. Temperature control is vital here to keep things fresh. For reds, you want a much longer maceration to extract plenty of color, tannins for structure and aging, and a wider range of flavor compounds.
How do winemakers encourage that extraction for reds?
They use techniques like remontage, which is pumping the juice from the bottom of the tank over the cap of skins floating on top, or pidgeage, which is physically punching that cap down into the juice. Both ensure good contact. Temperature during maceration and fermentation is also managed carefully to influence extraction and the final wine's body and aging potential.
And after soaking, the juice ferments.
Yes, alcoholic fermentation kicks in. That's where yeast gets to work, converting the grape sugars into alcohol and CO2. Again, temperature control is crucial. Cooler temps tend to preserve delicate aromas, warmer temps can extract more tannin and color, and the choice of fermentation vessel matters too. Stainless steel tanks are great for preserving fruit purity and freshness. Concrete tanks are kind of in between, offering stable temperatures and allowing a tiny bit of oxygen exposure, which can be good. And then you have wooden vats or barrels, which obviously add their own character during fermentation.
And many reds go through a second fermentation.
Yes, malolactic fermentation, or malo. This is done by bacteria, not yeast, and it converts the sharper malic acid, the acid you find in green apples, into softer lactic acid, like in dairy. It generally makes the wine feel rounder, smoother, and adds another layer of complexity. Pretty standard for most quality red Bobals.
You mentioned wood, oak barrels. How do they fit into the picture for Bobal?
Oak aging can have a really significant impact, especially on the more serious red Bobals. Firstly, the wood itself releases tannins, called ellagic tannins, which can add to the wine's structure.
Okay.
Secondly, wood is porous, so it allows a tiny, tiny amount of oxygen to interact with the wine over time. That's microoxygenation. This helps the wine's own tannins link up and soften, making them feel smoother and more integrated.
And flavor.
Absolutely. Oak aging is famous for adding those tertiary aromas and flavors, things like toast, vanilla, baking spices, maybe chocolate, sometimes even leather or tobacco notes as the wine matures further. The exact profile depends hugely on the type of oak. French oak tends to be subtler. American oak often gives more vanilla and coconut and how much the inside of the barrel was toasted. Plus, that microoxygenation also helps stabilize the wine's color.
Right, so with all these choices, maceration time, fermentation vessel, oak use, you end up with different styles. Let's recap those main styles of Bobal.
Sure. Broadly, you can think of three main categories. First, you have the young, fruity red wines.
What are they like?
Typically a really vibrant red or even purple color, lots of bright, fresh red and black fruit aromas, think cherries, raspberries. They have that characteristic refreshing acidity. The tannins are present, but usually quite soft, and they feel light to medium-bodied, designed for drinking young and fresh.
Okay, style number one. Then the more serious reds.
Exactly, the full-bodied reds that are built for aging. These will have a much deeper ruby color, maybe developing some garnet or brick red tones as they get older. The aromas are more complex, ripe, maybe even cooked black fruits, spice notes, often some earthy or savory elements. The tannins are firmer, more structured, more elegant, and the wine feels fuller in the mouth. These wines really evolve and gain complexity over time in the bottle.
And style number three, the rosés.
Yes, the rosados. Bobal makes fantastic rosés. They're known for their really intense, vibrant pink color. Aromatically, they burst with fresh red fruits, strawberry, raspberry again, often with some nice floral hints. They always have that lively acidity, making them super refreshing, but sometimes they have a little more structure, a hint of tannin compared to some other rosés, which gives them extra character.
It's definitely clear Bobal is way more than just a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What do these actually smell and taste like? The sensory details.
Okay, the sensory profile. On the nose, Bobal is often dominated by red and black fruit aromas. You know, cherry, plum, blackberry, raspberry are very common. Floral notes are also pretty typical, especially violet.
Nice.
And there's often a really characteristic spicy note, black pepper, sometimes licorice. That's a real Bobal signature for many people. Depending on the terroir, especially higher altitude sites, you might get some herbaceous hints too, like rosemary or thyme, maybe even balsamic touches.
And as it ages.
Or with oak.
Right, with age or significant oak influence, those aromas evolve. You start getting into leather, tobacco, dark chocolate, maybe your earthy or mineral notes. And of course, vanilla, toast, baking spices from the oak barrels themselves. It can get quite complex.
Sounds really appealing. And on the palate, when you taste it. Well, Bobal wines are almost always dry. You usually get an immediate impression of freshness thanks to that bright acidity we keep mentioning. The tannins are definitely a feature. They can feel a bit robust or rustic when the wine is young, but they tend to smooth out and become more polished with age or the right winemaking. The flavors echo the nose, lots of fruit, often with those spicy or earthy undertones coming through.
And the feel of the wine. Structure. body.
The structure is generally quite robust, built on that combination of tannins and acidity. This gives the wines balance and, in the better examples, real potential to age gracefully. Body-wise, it typically ranges from medium to full, giving the wines a sense of substance and concentration on the palate.
So terroir and winemaking really sculpt these sensations. How do they play out in the different styles we talked about?
In those young, fruity reds, you're really looking for the vibrant primary fruit aromas, that refreshing acidity, maybe slightly softer tannins, and a lighter to medium body. Easy drinking focus.
And the aged reds.
There, the fruit character will likely be deeper, maybe more towards black fruit, complemented by those complex spice, earth, and oak-derived notes. The tannins will feel more integrated, more velvety, but still provide that firm structure, and the body will be fuller. More serious, contemplative wines.
And the rosés.
Rosés are all about capturing that fresh, intense red fruit, strawberry, raspberry, maybe those floral notes, all lifted by that zippy acidity. They should feel crisp, dry, and refreshing, maybe with that subtle structural grip I mentioned.
Got it. Any practical tips for someone wanting to taste Bobal properly, get the most out of it?
Yeah, a few things help. Glassware, for instance. For the red Bobals, use a reasonably large glass, something with a decent bowl, to let those aromas open up. For rosés, a standard medium white wine glass is fine.
What about decanting?
Good question. For the young reds and rosés, usually not necessary, but for those more serious aged reds, giving them maybe 30 minutes to an hour in a decanter can really help them open up and soften those tannins. It lets the aromas emerge.
And serving temperature, always important.
Crucial. For the young reds, aim for maybe 16 to 18 degrees Celsius. That's about 64 Fahrenheit. The aged reds might show a bit better, slightly warmer, maybe closer to 18 degrees Celsius. And the rosés, definitely serve them chilled, say 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, which is around 46-50 Fahrenheit. Too cold and you lose the aromas, too warm and they lose their freshness.
Excellent practical advice. Okay, moving on to a fun part, pairing these wines with food. Where does Bobal fit in?
Food pairing. Bobal is actually incredibly versatile here. It works well with its native Spanish cuisine, obviously, but it pairs beautifully with lots of international dishes, too. The key is matching the style of the Bobal to the weight and flavor of the food.
Okay, let's break it down by style again. Those young fruity reds, what's their sweet spot?
Think everyday meals, lighter but flavorful stuff. They're fantastic with Spanish tapas, things like albóndigas, meatballs, croquetas, cured meats like chorizo or salchichon, even a tortilla española if it has some chorizo in it.
Nice. What else?
They're great with rice dishes like arroz de banda or paella with rabbit or chicken. Simple grilled meats like pork ribs or sausages. Pizza, especially with meat or grilled veggie toppings. Pasta with tomato or meat sauces. Even good old hamburgers, lighter BBQ dishes, or just a platter of grilled vegetables. That bright acidity cuts through richness beautifully.
Sounds super useful for casual dining. Now, what about the big boys? The full-bodied aged reds.
These need food with more substance and flavor intensity to match their structure and complexity. Think slow-cooked red meats. A classic pairing in Spain is rabo de toro, which is oxtail stew. Roasted lamb or kid goat, cabrito, is wonderful. Hearty stews like a rich fabada asturiana bean stew or cocido madrileno.
Okay, really hearty stuff.
Definitely. Also, game dishes, rice with game, roasted venison, or wild boar. Stronger cheeses, especially cured sheep or goat cheeses like manchego. Grilled or roasted red meats are a natural fit steak. Lamb chops. Rich dishes with dark sauces, like a classic boeuf bourguignon. Even dishes with earthy flavors like wild mushrooms or truffles can work beautifully.
Wow, okay. So these wines can really handle powerful flavors. And the rosés, always food-friendly.
Oh yeah, Bobal rosés are brilliant with food. They make a fantastic aperitif on their own, of course, but they pair wonderfully with a huge range of things. Cold tapas, salads, especially seafood salads, seafood rice dishes, grilled fish, definitely seafood paella or its noodle cousin, fideuà.
Lighter cuisines, too.
Absolutely. Lighter Asian dishes work well. Sushi, sashimi, maybe mild Thai curries, pasta with vegetable or seafood sauces, vegetarian pizzas, grilled vegetables again. They're just so refreshing and adaptable.
It really does seem like that combination of good acidity and noticeable tannins, even in the rosé sometimes, is what gives Bobal such range with food.
That's exactly it. The acidity cuts through fat and richness, cleanses the palate, and enhances flavors. The tannins, especially in the reds, interact with proteins in meat and cheese, making both the wine and the food seem softer and more harmonious.
Any final tips for creating a really great Bobal and food moment?
Well, beyond the specific matches, don't forget the basics we talked about: serving temperature, the right glass, decanting the older reds if needed. A great tip is always to try pairing wines with foods from the same region. They often grow up together and just click. And that, take a moment to think about the wine's story, where it came from. Mostly just create a nice, relaxed atmosphere and enjoy the combination.
Fantastic advice. Makes me hungry.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift focus slightly to the infrastructure around Bobal, the regions, the rules, the producers making it happen. Tell us about the denominations of origin, the DOs.
Right. The DOs are crucial. They're the legally defined geographical areas, and they set the rules for grape growing and winemaking to guarantee a certain style and quality and protect the region's identity. For Bobal, the absolute most important one is DO Utiel-Requena.
Because it has the most Bobal.
By far. It has the largest acreage of Bobal vineyards, and the region is practically synonymous with the grape. Their regulations strongly emphasize Bobal, often requiring it to make up a very high percentage of red blends. They define styles from young Joven reds up through aged categories like Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva, all focusing on Bobal's characteristic color, structure, and acidity.
Okay, Utiel-Requena is number one, and Manchuela, we said, is also key.
Very much so. D.O. Manchuela is another major player for Bobal. Their rules also specify minimum Bobal percentages for blends, but they perhaps allow a bit more flexibility for blending with other local or even international varieties compared to Utiel-Requena.
And the wines.
Because Manchuela has quite diverse terroirs within its borders, you see a good range of styles, including impressive aged reds, those lovely vibrant rosés, and they also make white wines from other grapes. There's maybe more focus here on expressing the nuances of specific vineyard sites.
And then the bigger, more varied DO Valencia. How does Bobal fit in there?
In DO Valencia, Bobal is one of the authorized red grapes, used in red and rosé blends. Because the region is so geographically diverse, the specific rules can vary between its subzones. Generally, Bobal here contributes to wines that are often fruity, quite accessible, and easy drinking.
And those other regions we touched on earlier, Ribera del Guadiana, Almanza?
Yes, in deals like those, you'll find Bobal, but usually in smaller quantities and typically as a component in red blends alongside other varieties.
Yeah.
It's not the star there in the same way it is in Utiel-Requena or Manchuela.
So who are some of the producers, the names to look for, who are really doing great things with Bobal?
Oh, there are many now. In Utiel-Requena, for example, you have wineries like Bodegas Mustiguillo. They were real pioneers in elevating Bobal, focusing on single vineyard expressions, really high quality. Dominio de la Vega is another excellent one, known for elegant Bobals and also cavas. Pago de Tharsis makes great wines too, including sparkling Bobal.
Any examples from other regions?
In Valencia, a big, well-known name is Bodegas Vicente Gandia. They produce a wide range of wines, and Bobal is definitely part of their portfolio. There are many exciting smaller producers in Manchuela, too, really exploring the grape's potential. It's worth seeking them out.
And these producers and DOs, they don't just operate in isolation, do they? They're usually umbrella organizations.
Exactly. The producer associations like the official regulatory boards, the Consejos Reguladores for DO Utiel-Requena and DO Manchuela play a really vital role.
What do they do?
All sorts of things. They coordinate joint promotional activities, organize regional wine fairs and tastings, manage marketing campaigns to build the region's brand. They're also responsible for defining and, crucially, enforcing the rules about grape growing, winemaking, quality standards, ensuring authenticity and typicity. They often support research and development projects, too, and handle communication and education to raise Bobal's profile, both in Spain and abroad.
It's a collective effort. It really sounds like it. Okay, looking ahead then. What does the future hold for Bobal? What are the main challenges, but also the opportunities?
Well, there are definitely challenges. Climate change is a big one. Even for a heat and drought-tolerant grape like Bobal, increasing temperatures and unpredictable water availability are serious concerns. It affects ripening, acidity levels. It demands smart water management and adapting vineyard practices to build resilience.
What else?
Market competition is fierce. Bobal still needs to work hard to stand out against globally famous grapes. That means ongoing education for consumers and trade, really highlighting what makes Bobal unique. And let's be honest, it's still overcoming that old image as just a bulk wine grape in some quarters. Continued focus on quality is essential there. Plus, effective marketing and communication are always needed to build and maintain an international presence.
But despite those hurdles, there seems to be a lot of optimism around Bobal too.
Oh, absolutely. Its inherent resilience, which we've mentioned a lot, is actually becoming a huge asset in the face of climate change. People are looking for grapes that can handle tougher conditions.
Good point.
Also, consumers are increasingly interested in wines with a unique story, authentic character, a sense of place, and Bobal delivers that. There's definitely potential to grow in existing markets and expand into new ones. People value its genetic heritage, its cultural significance, and if the communication and positioning are done right, well, Bobal looks set to be a really important part of a sustainable, quality-focused wine future for its home regions.
Sustainability keeps coming up. How central is that becoming for Bobal producers?
It's becoming incredibly important across the wine world, but definitely here too. There's much greater awareness now of the environmental footprint of conventional agriculture effects on soil health, water use, biodiversity.
So what are they doing?
Many growers are moving towards more sustainable practices. That means things like organic or biodynamic farming, actively promoting biodiversity in and around the vineyards, reducing chemical inputs, conserving water, focusing on building healthy living soils, managing waste better, using renewable energy. It's a whole system approach.
Is consumer demand driving this too?
Definitely. More and more wine drinkers want to know the wines they buy are produced responsibly. Plus, preserving the unique vineyard landscapes isn't just ecologically important, it's vital for wine tourism and protecting the cultural heritage tied to these regions.
And science and technology must be playing a part in adapting too. Research and development.
Hugely important. In the vineyard viticulture, there's ongoing work on clonal selection, finding those superior individual Bobal vines with better resilience, acidity, or aroma potential. Research into the best rootstocks for different soils and conditions, developing innovative farming techniques to manage ripening and yields perfectly, and using precision viticulture technology like sensors and drones to make really informed decisions block by block.
And in the winery. Enology.
Similar focus, fine-tuning things like maceration and fermentation techniques, maybe exploring the use of native yeasts from the vineyards themselves to enhance terroir expression. Experimenting with different aging vessels and protocols, always trying to balance tradition with achieving the highest quality. It's a constant process of learning and refinement.
It really sounds like Bobal is well equipped with both its natural strengths and human ingenuity to face the future.
I think so. That combination of natural resilience, its genuinely distinctive quality profile, and the growing recognition it's finally getting. It all points towards a really promising future. If the regions continue to embrace sustainability, keep innovating, and tell Bobal's unique story effectively, it can absolutely solidify its place as a really significant and appreciated grape on the world stage.
Well, that was a fantastic, truly deep dive into the world of Bobal. Just to quickly recap for everyone, we've traced its long history back centuries in eastern Spain, explored how the unique terroir shapes its character, seen its surprising versatility in the winery, leading to different styles, and discussed the growing buzz around its quality and potential.
And circling right back to that surprising fact from the start, it really is quite something that a grape planted so widely could remain relatively unknown internationally for so long. Hopefully you now have a much clearer picture of why that's changing and why Bobal is worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. So here's our final thought for you, the learner and everyone listening. Next time you're looking for a wine, maybe seek out a bottle of Bobal. Try a vibrant rosé or maybe a more serious complex red. See what you think. And consider how this tough, historic grape might just be a really important player in wine's future, especially as climates shift. It might even get you thinking. What other hidden gems, what other underappreciated local grapes out there are just waiting for their moment? Cheers to exploring.